Who is the lover? Allah. Who is Ar-Rahman? Allah. Who is Al-Mannan? La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah. Muhammad is the messenger, to Allah is our return. La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. سيقول السفهاء من الناس ما ولاهم عن قبلتهم التي كانوا عليها قل لله المشرق والمغرب يهدي من يشاء إلى صراط مستقيم وكذلك جعلناكم أمة وسطا لتكونوا شهداء على الناس ويكون الرسول عليكم شهيدا وما جعلنا القبلة التي كنت عليها إلا لنعلم من يتبع الرسول وما جعلنا القبلة التي كنت عليها إلا لنعلم من يتبع الرسول ممن ينقلب على عقبيه وإن كانت لكبيرة إلا على الذين هدى الله وما كان الله ليطيع إيمانكم إن الله بالناس لرؤوف رحيم صدق الله العظيم.
Let me, without much ado, just introduce our guest today, and he is Mr. Anwar Belem. Mr. Anwar Belem has had a long relationship with Islamic organizations, and one of the reasons that we have this Bright Sparks Forum is to try and encourage you to also get involved in community activities. And if you want to see typical example of people who have been involved at grassroots level in community organizations, both Mr. Belem as well as Dr. Manjra are typical examples of it. Many of the organizations that are very well known at the moment throughout South Africa, they were the founder members. So for instance, MYM, who doesn't know MYM today? Very few people don't know about AMAL, Association of Muslim Lawyers and Accountants, and a whole host of other organizations. So these people, Anwar Belem, Dr. Manjra and others, were the founder members. They laid the seeds of what has grown into internationally renowned organizations. So Mr. Belem has been involved over the years in many organizations. He was a founder member of AMAL, Association of Muslim Lawyers and Accountants, founder member of MYM, Muslim Youth Movement. He was involved in one of the first ever Islamic finance organizations in South Africa, even before Islamic banks started. And there was an institution called Jame. So they were the trailblazers in Islamic finance and banking in South Africa. So he was involved with them, and he's been involved with IPCI for a number of years as a trustee. And this is all volunteer. They don't get paid for it, all volunteer work that they do. As far as Mr. Belem's academic qualification is concerned, he's a chartered accountant by occupation. He did his BCom and CA qualifications at the old University of Durban Westfield and became UKZN. He served his articles with PricewaterhouseCoopers, where he was there for 5 years, and he was promoted to the position of a manager. Subsequently, he worked for a number of corporate organizations, some of which were Baker's Biscuits, where he was a director. Then he worked in Gauteng for Anglo-Val Group, very huge group, listed on the stock exchange. So he was a director there for a number of years. And for the past few years, he's a divisional manager at Impress Printers. So he's got a wealth of experience. So he's going to be discussing a very important topic today, and that is Islamic ethics and da'wah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Firstly, I must say I'm very pleased that so many of you are participating in this program. As you know, that is training you for leadership in future. So we hope, inshallah, that every one of you will become a leader in some way or the other in the Islamic community. Islam has a lot to offer to the world, and it's just us that is not coming up to the expectations, and we are in fact lagging behind. So programs like this hopefully will help us all to take on the leadership cudgels and to actually show the Islamic qualities to the world. It's important for us, and we'll just now we'll go on to some slides where we will see some of the reasons. But it's so critical for us. Firstly, we are commanded in the Quran, Amar bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi al Munkar. It is important for us to invite to good and to forbid evil. Now, this is a responsibility, a duty for every Muslim, not just somebody who's in dawah, in activities, somebody who's in Tabligh Jamaat or something like that. Not at all. It's for all of us that we need to do this, not only to non-Muslims, but to Muslims as well. The process has to be for both Muslims and non-Muslims. Now, if we look at the next slide, it says, what is the link between da'wah and ethics? What is the need? Is there a link between them? We're talking about our topic today is Islamic ethics and da'wah. Is there a link? You see, every one of us here projects Islam in some way or the other. I mean, that is our duty. We are projecting Islam. Now, if we are not practicing Islam or certain tenets of Islam we are not practicing, how can we give the message of Islam to others? We will be giving message of Islam to Muslims, to non-Muslims, and in recent years, it goes beyond that, goes to critics and Islam haters. So we have this constant Islamophobia that's going on all the time. And the attacks are incessant. There's no stop, there's no limit to the number of attacks that are being levied upon Muslims and Islam as a whole. We're getting verbal attacks all the time. There's, we're being defamed and all sorts of things we are being labeled. Then there's the physical aspect where people are destroying the Quran. They are burning, disfiguring mosques. I mean, we just had this incident in Sri Lanka now. How many mosques have been destroyed? And of course, we've also heard time and again, there's insulting the Prophet ﷺ. And we know that they're equating Islam with terrorism all the time. I mean, every now and then we see a situation where if there's a bomb blast somewhere, if it's a Christian or somebody involved, they wouldn't even mention his religion. But soon as a Muslim is involved, they will make sure they mention the word Muslim so-and-so did this. Always. They will make sure that they mention the Muslim. But if it was Christians, I mean, you take America, for example. In the since the beginning of this year, there were shootings in about 18 to 20 schools, and none of them were Muslims. In almost every case, it was a white American Christian that was involved. But of course, in that case, it is usually some isolated case or mentally deranged or, all sorts of things. He wasn't a Christian, it wouldn't be, even his religion would never be mentioned. But whenever it comes to Islam, it's always, it's a Muslim so-and-so did this, a Muslim so-and-so did that. And then, of course, we know the genocide that's going on, throughout the world. I mean, we know what's happened in Rohingya, in Myanmar. Now, as Muslims, we can't sit back, we can't stand back and say, well, I'm a Muslim, yeah, okay, I've just got to carry on. It is important for us to actually be talking to the people, to be at least, explaining what Islam is all about. As you know, the IPCI is involved in one of the projects is mosque visits. They get non-Muslims, even tourists, people from overseas, German, French, all sorts of nationalities, Americans, they all come regularly, and our able staff take them to the mosque. And one of the tours, somebody asked, what is in all those cupboards in those mosques? Are there weapons? We want to open them. Let us see all the guns and things that you have in there. Because that is the perception they have about Islam, that Islam is a terrorist religion, it's people are just there to kill. But in fact, if anything, it's the other way around. I mean, you take, for example, in Israel, we know that the land is being stolen by the Jews from the Muslims, from the Palestinians. And every time the Palestinians resist, they are the terrorists. Not the people who are stealing the land. It's the Palestinians who are the aggressors. And yet they have no weapons. They have stones and very crude weaponry they use to try and defend themselves. And they become the victims. Or should I say the aggressors. The Jews are the victim. Shame. They suffer because these people throw stones on them because they've stolen their land. Right now, how does one give da'wah? That's the important thing. What do you do? And if we look at da'wah in the early years, does anybody know how da'wah at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the time of the Sahabas, how was da'wah given? I'm talking in the main. How was it? Which was the most effective way that they gave the da'wah? Well, I can tell you that it was the character. It was individual character. It was the character of the individual, of the Sahabas. That is what actually was the main form of the da'wah. When people saw what Muslims are, when people saw how they conduct themselves, they realized that, this is where it should be. And this is not something that is prevalent in those times. I'll give you an example of current times, because people think that, today maybe, we are not able to portray da'wah from our conduct. But that is not true. I'll give you one example. The company where I work for, as the advocate said, it's Impress. We have a staff member there. Her name now is Rabia. And she embraced Islam a few years ago. So we asked her, what made you embrace Islam? And the people were thinking, it must be looking at us, how we are doing, what we do, how we pray, whatever. That wasn't the case. At that time, and I don't know now, her mother used to live in a squatter camp. She used to live in a squatter camp, and near her, a mother of one of her younger ladies also lived in a squatter camp, her neighbor. So Rabia lived in a squatter camp, and her neighbor was in a squatter camp. The neighbor was a Muslim. And every now and then, her daughter used to come and visit the mother. And when Rabia saw how this lady was, this daughter that came to see her mother, how she conducted herself, how she spoke to the people, how she spoke to the mother, how she revered the mother. And she said to herself, I want to be like her. I want to be this kind of person. And that's how I want to be a Muslim. So even in today's times, there is always the way we depict Islam, it's the way that will impact on the people. Because if we just continue to have our un-Islamic ways in our practices, we are going to have not going to be able to disseminate Islam. And in my view, the character is the most effective form even today for da'wah. Yes, we've got da'wah organizations like the Islamic Propagation Center, Islamic Da'wah Movement, SA Da'wah Network, and a host of them. We have lots of them. But in the end, it is how you conduct yourself, how the Muslims behave. People want to emulate you. People want to be like you. That's what the critical aspect is, that how do you conduct yourself? And when they see this is how a Muslim behaves, this is how a Muslim conducts himself, that's when they become interested in da'wah. Each and every one of us is a flag bearer of Islam and a representative of Muslims at large. If we behave poorly, dishonestly, greedily, mercilessly, etc., then those who interact with us will conclude that Muslims have these evil qualities. On the other hand, if we embrace the character of Islam, those around us will definitely be attracted to Islam, and many of them will even embrace Islam. So here you are, there's a very clear, this is a saying by Hisham al-Talib. He put it in his book, and what he's saying is, this is what we are. Every one of us is an ambassador of Islam. And if we are ambassador of Islam, we have to follow a certain code of ethics, we have to follow a certain way. We have to conduct ourselves in a certain way. And we know that that is essential. I mean, I give you an example. Maulana Abu Bakr Chetty, maybe you know him, maybe you don't know him. He originally was from Verulam, a revert into Islam, and he is operating in the Nelspruit area. And he's got many madrasas there, many dawah organizations there. And one day I was listening to one of his talks, and he said to us, there was this one student, youngster, he met him at the center, one of the centers, and he tells him, you know what, I don't see you anymore in the mosque. What's the problem? He said, no, well, I've been a Muslim for 2 years now. So now I'm an old Muslim, so I don't have to go to the mosque. I'm an old Muslim now, so I don't have to perform salah. I mean, that's a serious indictment on us, serious indictment on the born Muslims. That, in other words, the impression we inculcated into him, that if you are a new Muslim, yes, you have to be performing salah all the time, and then now if you become an old Muslim, salah is no more. And yet we know salah is obligatory. After your iman, declaration of iman, salah is the second most important pillar of Islam. So it is critical that we conduct ourselves in a manner that is befitting of what we tell them. In this hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, he said that should Allah guide anyone at your hands, it is better for you than everything on which the sun rises and sets. It's a very, very telling hadith. If we look at it very carefully, just one person, if one person accepts Islam at your hands, it is better for you than everything on which the sun rises. So it's not just what's in the world. We're talking about the universe. The sun lights up the universe, not just our planet. The sun lights up the moon, the various planets. So it is better than that. That's how important it is for us, to be spreading this word, to be enabling, giving the message to the others. On the day, now, related to this, on the day of resurrection, the most weighty item on the scales of deeds will be good manners. And this is a narration in Abu Dawud. Now, this again, we should not underestimate this hadith. In fact, there are many hadiths that, we'll come to a couple of them now, which tell us how critical, how important it is to have a good character, because that's going to hold you in good stead in the hereafter as well. So forget about dawah for a moment. It's just even for yourself, for your own personal development. It's very important that you have a good character, you have a good dispensation to fellow human beings, to fellow Muslims, and that's going to have a big impact even in the akhirat. When you will be questioned, when you will be up for reckoning, you will be your character will hold very highly in your favor. Here's another hadith narrated by our mother, Sister Aisha radiallahu anha. Again, a believer with good manners and good moral disposition gets the same reward as he who spends his nights in prayer and observes fast during the days all the time. Here again it emphasizes how important, how critical your character is, how critical it is for you to have good mannerisms, how critical it is for you to have a good moral disposition against, with all your people, with all the with everybody. And good character is usually with people. With yourself, there's a limit to what you can do yourself. The character is always portrayed when you're interacting with people. And we are interacting with people all the time, be it Muslims, be it non-Muslims, whoever it may be, we're interacting with everybody. Now, for us to be also portraying this image of da'wah. In order for us to be now also enabling the facilitation, the process, for us to be portraying this image of Islam, we also need to have a comprehensive understanding of Islam ourselves. So it's important that we understand, we have a holistic view of Islam. And in Sahih Muslim, there's a hadith which says, a strong believer is better and dearer to Allah than a weak one, although they are both good. So it is critical that we educate ourselves on Islam. We educate ourselves so that we are fully afraid with what Islam is all about. Because how are we going to portray this Islamic character to other people? I mean, to give you an example, you, for example, let's say you have a habit of drinking, and we know it's prohibited Islam. Alcohol is totally prohibited Islam. Now, if you go to a non-Muslim friend and you tell him, look man, embrace Islam, and one of the prohibitions in Islam is not to drink, but how is that going to be possible? Is he likely to say, yeah? I mean, if he sees you practicing, if he sees you in a drunken state, and you are now telling me to become a Muslim, and you not practicing it yourself, does it make sense? Okay, now just to go further from there on the ethical side, on the character side that we are going to look at, is these are some of the characteristics that we have to develop within ourselves. And yet again, it's not just restricted to da'wah, it's also for our personal development, for ourselves. The first one is tolerance. Now, you know, sometimes we have a habit, many of us have a habit that we're intolerant towards somebody does something, or the more tolerant you are, the better you are, the better you portray yourself. And linked to that is sabr, the patience. We need to have, we can't always be impatient with anybody. If anybody says something, even if somebody insults you, you know, don't be so intolerant, so reactive that you immediately respond in an intolerant manner or in an impatient manner. It is critical that every one of us inculcates that habit of sabr, so that we, you know, don't react spontaneously. We don't react impulsively. We look at how we conduct ourselves. We look at what the person has said or what the person has done, and then we react accordingly. Another good characteristic is being kind-hearted and being helpful. Now, this in itself is such a good quality. I'll give you an example. In America, as we know, Islamophobia is quite at a high level there, and there is quite a lot of anti-Islam propaganda. Now, there's some non-Muslim families, and they are saying, how is it possible that they are telling us Muslims are like this, and Muslims are like that, and Muslims are whatever? You know, they give you all sorts of names, and all derogatory names. They say, this Muslim is our neighbor, but he takes our children to school. This Muslim is a neighbor, and every now and then he sends food for us. This Muslim is our neighbor, and every now and then he sends gifts for us. This Muslim is our neighbor, he entertains our children, and they eat, you know, with them. How can Muslims be bad people? Because why? The nature, the good-heartedness of these people, because of their nature, that they have this thing, they are inclined towards them. That already negates the perception of Islam, or the negative perception of Islam. That already negates the fact or the perception they feel that Muslims are intolerant people, Muslims are terrorists, and Muslims are aggressive people, and they are evil people, you name it. I mean, in another instance, in one of the Middle East countries, there was a madrasa carrying on, And this non-Muslim lady brings her child to the madrasa, and she tells the imam there that, look, I want this child to study here. So, are you Muslim? He said, no, we're not Muslims. So what is the reason? Why do you want your child to come here? She says, see my neighbors, they are Muslims. And when they leave home, they kiss the mother, they hug the mother, and they say goodbye to the mother, and they go to madrasa. When they come back again, they hug their mother. He says, my children don't have that respect for me. They don't talk to me like that. At least I thought if they come and study at your institution, they will at least respect me more. They will actually be more tolerant and more respectful towards me. Another advisable character is eloquent in speech, and I'm sure in your leadership training course you will probably be learning a bit of speech. It is important that you are eloquent in the way you speak, in the way you talk, so that you have a convincing argument. I'll give you another example. Alhamdulillah, this week our maid accepted Islam, and we've been speaking to her for some time now. And Al-Imdad had a maids and madams program for them. I think it was on Wednesday. And we've been talking to her about Islam, even others tried to get her to speak to her. And she sort of expressed interest, and she just wasn't really convinced. Until at this talk, it's the way the presenter spoke to them, and she, with 27 others, embraced Islam at that presentation. Then we asked her, look, we've been talking to you for so long, others have been talking to you, yet she says, no, it's the way that man spoke to us, the way what he said, how he said it, that's what really convinced me, to become a Muslim. So it's important on how you speak to the people, very, very critical. And the next item is anger management. This is a very serious problem. It's a human thing to lose your temper, to be angry, and anger management in itself is a topic on its own, and it requires a good discussion. But I won't go into any details, but it's important that we try and manage our anger, because when you have anger, you say all sorts of things, and when you are saying all sorts of things, you lose respect. People lose respect for you because of the way you talk. I mean, we know how people, and I'm talking about Muslims, forget about non-Muslims, they will start, at the slightest provocation, they'll start swearing and all sorts of language they will use. What kind of respect can you have for such a person? Right? In the next slide we say, do not hate each other, do not envy each other, do not turn away from each other, but rather be servants of Allah as brothers. It is not lawful for a Muslim to boycott his brother for more than 3 days. It's very serious. Now, this hadith, I'll give you one example of this hadith. It says, do not envy one another. That's one of the aspects in this hadith that's being related. And here's an example. There's an old friend, an elderly person, he met a friend of his, and he sort of spoke to him, he was in class with him and so forth. And he saw that this guy is driving the latest model Mercedes, a very fancy vehicle. And he goes home and he thinks to himself, he kicks himself, he says, oh, both of us were at school, look at me, I'm a failure, look at him, he's now driving this very fancy vehicle, and here I am driving my little whatever, Corolla or Polo or whatever, not even that maybe, maybe an old Skoro, whatever it may be. He's, that's how he was feeling. What happened? It transpired later that friend of his was actually a chauffeur driving somebody else's Mercedes. But he was getting, worked up, getting jealous because he felt both of them were together, studied together, and look at him now, whether they're worlds apart. But in fact, this person was even worse off than him. He was just a chauffeur, whereas this man was running a small business or whatever. So these things we should be, looking at ourselves, and envy, jealousy. These are not characteristics that are, what you call befitting of a Muslim. Now there are 9 golden rules extracted from Suratul Hujarat, and this is a very important surah for personal character development. It's important that we should actually be reading this, read the English translation. The first characteristic being, before this, the surah talks about you're conducting yourself in the presence of the Prophet ﷺ, that you not speak loudly in his presence, speak in a soft tone, have respect for him. And this is just not only to the Prophet ﷺ, it also relates to any person in, a person, elderly person in your community, or a learned person, a scholar. You need to respect them. Don't talk louder than him, so forth, or her. فَتَبَيَّنُوا, investigate when you receive information, lest you harm people out of ignorance. Now, often we are very good at news coming to us, and unfortunately WhatsApp is one of the worst places where information is just disseminated. Often people twist information, wrongful information, and they pass it to you, and we don't hesitate to forward it to all our contacts or whatever. And the problem is, when we hear something that's negative, or when you hear something that's bad about somebody, go and investigate it. Don't ever, just accept it and pass it on. Because we know there are also evil people around, and they will tell you something bad about somebody because they have an issue with somebody, or whatever the reason is. And when that happens, we often have the habit of just passing this information on without really verifying it. And it's so critical. And this is an injunction from the Quran. It's not something out of my head, it's from the Quran itself. The next one is for aslihu. That is, make settlement between your brothers as believers are all brothers. For aslihu. Allah is telling us in the Quran that whenever there's differences between you, even there's arguments between you, always try and make settlement. Don't let things go on and on. We know, for example, in the tribes in the time of the advent of Islam, or even before that time, there were tribes there. Between tribes, they used to have some small things that will go on. For example, let's say this is one tribe and that's another tribe. Maybe this chap, hurt somebody or did something. That grudge carries on for generations, and they will continue with clashing because of once. And often in generations, they don't even know why they're fighting. Now, in Islam, we always encourage brotherhood. We always encourage unity, and always reconciliation between people. So please always try and reconcile. If there's differences, if people are fighting, let's get them together. And this is also an injunction from the Quran. The next characteristic that's reflected in this Surah Hujarat, wa'aqsitu. Wa'aqsitu means to act justly whenever there is any dispute. Try and settle it as justly as possible. In other words, be fair. Because he's your friend, you don't side with him, or because or he's your enemy, or she's your enemy, don't issue a judgment against him or her because of that. Always try to be fair and try and get your judgment fair, and try and reconcile them as best as you can. The next characteristic is la yaskhar. Yaskhar. Don't ridicule or insult people. Perhaps they may be better than you in the eyes of Allah. So very true. Often you insult people, or not you, but generally we insult people, or we make derogatory remarks. They are in many times better than you in the sight of Allah. It's not what their standing is in the community, what their standing is with other people. It's your relationship with Allah. What is your standing with Allah? And you might insult him. In the meanwhile, Allah regards him very highly. He is in a very high status, because you don't know what his personal life is. You don't know what his interaction with Allah is. You don't know how he's conducting himself, and you are insulting him. So it is so critical, so important that you that you refrain from doing this. Refrain from insulting people. Refrain from passing derogatory remarks. Refrain from ridiculing people. It's so important. And that in itself is such a big character development, because you will be respected for that. The next characteristic is wala talammazu, is do not insult one another. Again, very critical that you don't insult each other. Be respectful. Even if the person had said something that's maybe wrong, maybe not right, or maybe he said something that's casting aspersions on you, do not insult him. Talk to him in a very respectful manner. The next, ijtanabu kasiran minaz zanni, is avoid negative assumptions, that is suspicions. In fact, some of the suspicions are sins. So do not have suspicions. Do not have suspicions about others. Do not have any negative thoughts about people, because sometimes those are sins. The reason is because what your suspicions are, they're probably wrong. What you suspect that that person is about is probably a wrong assumption or wrong suspicion. Wala tajassasu, and do not spy at each other behind others' backs, do not behind their backs. So please do not start talking about evil about somebody else behind their backs. Now this is an important characteristic, an important thing that we should develop in our lives. Wala yaghtab, do not backbite each other. It is a major sin to backbite each other. It is like eating the meat of your dead brother. That's how serious it is. That if you're backbiting, if you're talking evil about somebody and telling somebody this person is whether it's true or not, if it's not true, then you are slandering him. If it's true, you are backbiting him. And this was the Prophet ﷺ explained this in a hadith. Because the Sahabas asked him, what if it's true? He said it's true, still don't do it, because you are now slandering him. And if it's true, you are backbiting him. That is still wrong, because it is important that we refrain from these characteristics. Right, the next one is an important injunction from the Quran. أَتَأْمُرُونَ النَّاسَ بِالْبِرِّ وَتَنْسَوْنَ أَنفُسَهُم. Do not enjoin right conduct on the people and forget to practice it yourself. There is no such thing as do what I tell you to do and don't do what I do. That doesn't work. In other words, Allah is telling us that don't tell other people to do good, don't tell other people to conduct themselves in a certain way, don't tell other people that this is right and that is wrong, and you forget to practice it yourself. It's again, it's in Quran, Surah Baqarah, verse 44, that do not enjoin good conduct on people and forget to practice it yourself. So important that you practice what you preach. I gave you an example earlier about, if your own characteristic about being in a drunken state, or and you telling other people not to be, not to drink as one of the injunctions of Islam. I'll give you an example now. If we look at the Bible, Matthew chapter 5, in verse 27 it says, you have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. That is an injunction in the Bible. Then there's another, in the next verse in the Bible, but I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Now, isn't that sound familiar in Islam? That look, even if you looking at a woman lustfully, and obviously it applies to a woman looking at a man lustfully. So, if you look at in the Christian world or in the Western world, which is substantially Christian, the problem is exactly that what happens? Marriage is an institution that is sort of dying. Living together, boyfriend, girlfriends, sleeping together is quite a common thing. And yet, this is a clear injunction in the Bible which says that adultery is a serious offense, you shall not commit it. But yet, they want to propagate their Christianity, but themselves, this is a serious violation. Even if you look in the Bible, the way the Isa alayhi salam performed salah, he made sajda, he made ruku. They don't do that. They sit in the church and they have chorus and they have band, music. That is their form of prayer. They don't pray like how Isa alayhi salam prayed. Even in the Bible, in the chapter on Deuteronomy, they are forbidden from interest. It says so in the Bible, except against the heathen. In other words, against non-Christians you can charge interest, but amongst yourself you not. But interest is a lifeblood of the economy. All the Western economies, in fact even you can say all the economies around the world, that interest is a lifeblood. Everywhere interest is, and yet they don't practice upon it. And they want to now promote their way of life, but yet a lot of the injunctions that are in the Bible, they are not practicing. Let us as Muslims not be the same. Let us be more practical. Let us not follow the same principle that where we are unable to practice what we preach. Very critical that we practice what we preach. Right, on the next slide we have a verse from the Quran. It's Ud'u ila sabili rabbika, invite people to the way of your Lord, bil hikmah, with wisdom and good counsel, and debate with them in the best of manners. Now this is an injunction from the Quran. It's telling you and I, invite people to the way of your Lord with wisdom and good counsel. Debate with them in the best of manners. We are all the time, it's not something that it's optional, that we don't invite people. And again, this invite people to wisdom and good counsel, it also applies to Muslims, fellow Muslims. If you see a Muslim doing something wrong, you got to try and invite him back, to try and point out to him or her that this is not right, and you do it in a diplomatic way. You don't go and, if you see somebody doing something wrong, give him a tight smack and say, you're doing something wrong. He's going to react negatively. You do it with hikmah, with wisdom, in a way that, you correct him. I mean, a good example is, during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, his grandsons, Hassan and Hussein, saw somebody making wudu. And he wasn't doing the wudu correctly. Now, he was an elderly person, these are youngsters, they knew that he was doing it incorrectly. What did they do? They didn't go to him, hey uncle, you are doing it wrong, this is not how you must do it. That uncle will feel, who's the little upstart telling me how to make wudu? After he finished his wudu, they said, look, uncle, we're not sure if we're making a wudu properly. We are now going to make wudu, just check if we are doing it properly. And they made wudu in his presence, and when he saw how they made wudu, himself, he realized that he was doing it incorrectly, and he then said, oh, thank you, I was making a mistake, I was doing something wrong. You guys, so he realized, by them doing that, he realized that he was making the wudu incorrectly. And we got another example. In the Quran itself, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells Musa alayhi salam when addressing Pharaoh. Now Pharaoh, as you know, was a real despot of the time, a real oppressor of the time, and he openly declared, I am God, I am Allah, nobody is superior to me, and so forth. And he was very repressive. Anybody said anything, to contradict him or to say anything against him, he would not hesitate to destroy them. But Allah tells Musa alayhi salam in the Quran, speak to him in gentle words. Maybe he takes to you to the advices or the fears. So Allah is telling him, speak to him gently. Don't go and shout at him, don't to him, and soften. Speak to him not with harshness. Even though he may respond with harshness, even though he may respond with whatever, he may respond aggressively. Speak to him very gently, very softly. So that is the important thing that you do. If anybody is not right, anybody is doing something incorrect, you speak to them gently in a soft way. We must present indisputable facts. We often have a tendency to argue over disputed, disputed things, items that are in dispute between us, or differences in opinions. And we must always distinguish religion from customs. Because sometimes customs become part of the deen. And I specifically refer to, well, both people who, like the Indian Muslims, origin from India. Often we adopt Indian customs within our lifestyle. We do adopt Indian customs. And even sometimes among the local Muslims who have become Muslims, they still stick to some of the old customs. It's very important that we separate customs from deen. Doesn't mean you don't participate in the customs. If there's nothing wrong with them, if they don't contradict Sharia. I'm not saying you don't, but it's important that you distinguish between the two, because sometimes the customs, people think it's a fard, it's important that it has to be adhered to all the time. So it is important that we separate the two. Now, as far as the giving of dawah, it's not in your hands, not in my hands. A person to accept Islam is something that it's in Allah's hands. Allah tells us in the Quran, there is no compulsion in religion. La ikraha fid deen. That there is no compulsion in religion. In other words, you are not forced to become a Muslim. And we know that rumors have been spread around, or malicious ideas that Islam was spread by the sword, and Muslims, force you to become Muslims, even if you are not Muslims, and they give some weird examples. I mean, a perfect example is when the Prophet ﷺ himself, when they conquered Mecca. When they conquered Mecca in the 10th year of Hijrah, he came to Mecca, and it was actually a bloodless war. When they saw the Muslims and they saw the numbers, the Meccans just gave up. And how did the Prophet ﷺ react? He didn't say, yes, you come here. You did this to me, you did that, you did this, you killed so-and-so, and you fellow Muslim, you tortured this person, you tortured Bilal, you threw intestines on my back when I was praying. He didn't do any of that. What he said, I forgive you. And the people couldn't believe it. They thought he's going to now take revenge. I forgive you. He didn't actually go and fight with them. Nor did he say to them, now you shall become Muslims, otherwise I won't forgive you. Not at all. He forgave them, regardless of what they said. And people entered Islam in hordes as a result of this action, because they couldn't believe it that, firstly, he came, it was a war, he conquered them, they just gave up because they couldn't muster up the numbers or so forth, and he immediately gave up, and they gave up, and he didn't at all sort of force them into Islam. There was no force at all, whether it's now or then or any time. I know there may have been isolated incidents forcing people, but that's not Islam. If you are forcing somebody to become a Muslim, that's not Islam. That person has to become a Muslim of their own free will. Doesn't have to be forced into becoming a Muslim. There's another verse in the Quran in 92:12. It says, indeed we have taken it upon ourselves to guide. Allah says himself, He is the one that gives hidayat, not you and I. So whenever we are engaging in anything, we have to, it's in Allah's hands. I mean, I gave you an example of a maid. After 24 years, she accepted Islam. That was the time when she was destined to get hidayat. She got it now. It was 24 years later. So it's not in your hands, not in my hands. Our job is to give the message. And very important, as I say to you all, is your personal character plays a very important role in your day-to-day life. Because it's not just, we are also fighting, not just giving dawah specifically for people to embrace Islam, we are also giving dawah to people who are attacking Islam, who are criticizing Islam, and you will find in later years when you're going, probably most of you are in Islamic schools, you probably don't have that much of exposure of Islamophobia, but once you go out at university level, you will see what's going to happen. People will ridicule you, and people will do all sorts of things to try and ridicule Islam, insult Islam. And what do? You don't sit back. You need to educate them in Islam. And at this point, I'd like to draw your attention to this organization called Islamic Propagation Center. As you know, it was started by Sheikh Didat. And what made him actually do this? Does anybody know what made Sheikh Didat actually go into this Islamic propagation? Does anybody know? Anybody have an idea? Well, in the early days, he was in the South Coast, and he was actually near Adam's Mission. He was working in a shop there. People know Adam's Mission? Pastor Manzim Toti. Now, there, the people used to ridicule Islam. They used to say all sorts of things about Islam. And at that time, in the 60s, late 50s, Islam was a low ebb, not just in this country, but internationally. Everywhere Muslims were being insulted. And because our level of deen was low, we knew the deen, and I say we, people of the time, knew that this was the right deen, but they didn't know how to respond. They were just being, on the negative, being targeted, being attacked all the time. So Sheikh Didat decided, no, this is not on. And what he did, he started studying Islam, and he started studying the Bible. And he now started attacking the Christians, telling them from the Bible, you're saying Christ was crucified, but that's nonsense. This is what it is. This is what the Bible says about Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What are you talking about? And suddenly they got onto the back foot. And of course he became an international figure. Even in the Middle East, he came as a breath of a breath of fresh air, because they were also in the same dilemma as us. They were also there not being able to defend Islam. And when he started going into that scenario, there was a complete change. The whole world changed. It was a breath of fresh air for the entire Muslim Ummah. Everybody, suddenly became more active. And I mean, you can still see his videos and things. And I think IPCI is having a course. In fact, they have regular courses on comparative religion. So those of us who are keen, you can enroll for the courses. They're 10-day courses. You can speak to Brother Muhammad Khan here. So, and you can participate in these courses. It can only be beneficial to us. Again, I just want to reiterate that it's very important that we all develop our personal characters for our own selves, for our own benefit, that we develop our character, and secondly, so that we portray Islam in the correct light. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.
Okay, Jazakallah, Brother Anwar. That was a most informative presentation. He covered many, many aspects of Islam. He covered the ethical aspects, the importance of having the correct character, the importance of da'wah, how da'wah can be carried out, attacks on Islam, how it can be responded to. Turn right as far back as possible. Now I want you to have a look at this particular movie clip. It's a short clip. The movie was Karate Kid. How many of you know about that movie? Karate Kid? More girls know about it than the boys. Okay, how many Karate Kids were there? How many movies? How many? 4, okay. I saw the very first one, right? And this, I think, so is the last one, but this particular clip is relevant to what we're going to be discussing. This boy